I just want to say happy Thanksgiving to you as we get going. In case I forget, some of you are going, some of you are staying. Maybe like in my case, I got a whole lot of people coming to my house. My father-in-law and my brother-in-law, they're cooking prime rib and turkey on Thanksgiving. Let me just tell you, I'm glad they're doing it because they're really good at cooking. I'm going to set the table. That's what I'm going to do. Well, I also want to say hello to those joining us online or maybe joining us somehow in West Lafayette. Just want to say hello. And, you know, along with Thanksgiving coming this week, something else has come into our lives recently, and that's the return of the Hallmark movies. You know those Hallmark Christmas movies? I'm not real crazy about them, but there's a couple people in my house that really love them. Right, dear? Yes. And you know, what's crazy about these movies is they're all like the same. It's like a formulaic. They're all in some like mountain village never heard of, and it doesn't exist. And the two most beautiful people in the movie, physically, of course, they fall in love, they get married, and at first they don't like each other, or one's got a problem that seems intractable. I'm spoiling it, my wife says, but it's the truth. And it always turns out, in the end, so much better. It always helps, too, if somebody has had a spouse who's died in the scenario. I don't know how that works, but it does work out that way. And there's just a lot of things going on there. It always turns out right. You know, one of the things I love about the Bible is not a Hallmark movie. It doesn't try and convince us that life is a Hallmark movie. A lot of us, we'd love to curate our lives to be perfect in every way, to be just that every moment and every relationship we would ever have would be adorable. But that's not honest. The Bible is really honest with us. We've been in this series, Not Okay. This is the third week. We're finishing this series this week. And the thing that we've been focused on, mental health, and what we've looked at each week is how many people are impacted by this. A staggering number of people are impacted by this. Numerous sources will tell you that 1 in every 4 or 5 people are impacted by mental illness, that you're more likely to suffer from some kind of mental illness than you are to experience heart disease or cancer. It's true. And what we've been doing in this series, we've defined mental health challenges as what happens when our negative emotions or imagination gets out of control. And it can manifest itself in a number of ways. It could be through depression or a mental disorder, chemical disorder. It could be through anxiety or eating disorders, addictions, self-harm. Those are just a few things that I could name. And we've been making the point in this series that mental health challenges can even hit people who are faithful to God and who are doing all the right things. You can be a believer and suffer from all kinds of problems in your mind or emotions. Now, God may provide a miracle for you, an instantaneous miracle that makes it all right, that makes you completely well and sound through and through. Or He may choose to heal you in some other way. Medications might be involved. Therapy might be involved. Today I'd like to focus on how those who aren't facing these problems but have someone with these problems in their life might respond. And in order for us to think about this important topic to God, because we've looked at some of the Bible, a lot of the Bible is focused on precisely these problems. We're going to, as we think about how God processes this, how God wants us to think about these things, we're going to first focus on Jesus. Because the Gospels reveal something about Jesus uniformly, and that is that Jesus' primary ministry was teaching and miracles. Miracles of healing in particular. The Bible said it summarizes this in a number of ways. We get the impression Jesus healed thousands of people during his ministry. Look at Luke chapter 4, verse 40. It says this, while the sun was setting, all those who had any who were sick with various diseases brought them to him. And we do see Jesus doesn't have like a specialty in like straightening people's backs or making one leg that's longer than the other the same size or anything like that. Jesus, he's healing all kinds of problems. And it says that he laid his hands on each of them. That's an important line for us to pick up on. Because in the ancient world, in Judaism, there was an impression about people who had all kinds of sicknesses, and that is that by touching them, you could become defiled or unclean. And so it's a shocking thing for us, for example, in the Gospels when Jesus touches lepers, or even when Jesus touches a person who's lame. Maybe you don't know this, but you know, in the story in the book of Acts, you can read about it in Acts chapter 3. Peter and John, they walk up to this guy, and he is lame from birth, the Bible tells us, and they end up healing him, and he is waiting at the gate. He can't go into the temple. People are headed into the temple through this gate. He can't go in there because he's lame. That's how they thought. But Jesus' ministry consisted of touching those that were sick, and he was healing them. That's the nature of Jesus' ministry. And what I'd say is that we need to get a handle on what Jesus valued and what Jesus wanted for people and how Jesus interacted with people. Because if we're following Jesus and seeking to become like Jesus, then we need to do the same kinds of things. Now, you could get really hung up in thinking, well, am I saying that we're all supposed to heal people? I'm not saying that. But I think we ought to touch the sick. I think that we all ought to do what we can to express comfort and love and mercy to those that are hurting. And so what could we say about Jesus' ministry to the sick? It would be this. Jesus is a healer who expresses love to the most despised sick ones. I mentioned how he touched lepers and he touched the lame. And because of the way that Judaism works, you know, you could become unclean just by touching something that an unclean person touched. You could become unclean by sitting on the couch that a person who was unclean sat on. But Jesus, he regularly touches and embraces these people, and he celebrates it when these people touch him. I think about numerous stories in the Gospels. I think of the woman with the issue of blood. She was bleeding internally for almost 2 decades. The Bible says that she'd spent all of her money on doctors and just couldn't get well. And eventually she heard Jesus was coming through, and so she did everything she can to push her way through the crowd, making everyone unclean that she's touching along the way. And finally she reaches out and she touches the hem of Jesus' robe. And she is instantaneously healed, and it's something that Jesus celebrates, even though it would have made him unclean. We find Jesus spending time with people who were social outcasts also, who were spiritually defiled people. I think of Zacchaeus, a short tax collector. We read about him in Luke, the 10th chapter, and he is somebody who has ripped people off. He has conspired with the enemy to oppress the Jews, and so all the Jewish people, they hate him. They see him as a traitor. And Jesus comes passing by this tree that he's climbed in order to see Jesus pass by because he's so short. And Jesus looks up at him and he says, Zacchaeus, you better get ready. I'm coming to your house today. And invite all your friends, basically. Now, his only friends are degenerates. His only friends are people who are also who are also social outcasts. But Jesus goes to his home and has a meal with him, something that would have made him unclean. And in that context, Zacchaeus announces he's changing his whole life. He's going to make amends with his past. He's going to make it right with every person he's ever hurt. Amazing story, but it shows us where Jesus was coming from. Jesus never pushed away people who were broken. And we can't let ourselves, as a church, ever become a social club that hides our weaknesses in order to let people participate. One of the liberating and even scandalous truths of the gospel is that the church and the gospel is for broken people. It's meant to be for people who are weak. It's meant to be for people with a shameful past. That's what the church is all about. Jesus, we find this brilliant example in the Gospels of just how far Jesus would go in terms of his belief that all people can be restored. In Mark chapter 5, it's the story of Jesus and his disciples. They get into a boat, they cross the Sea of Galilee. It's not very far, several miles, and they end up on the other shore, the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee, and they get out, and right off the coast, it seems, is this gathering of tombs, a cemetery of sorts, and there is a man living in there. We pick up the story in Mark chapter 5, verse 2. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. That's important because for Jews, again, they see tombs and the place of dead people as unclean places. This guy is unclean because of where he's standing, where he's living. But on top of that, he's got an impure spirit. Something has so distorted him as a person. Nobody wants to be with him, and it says no one could bind him anymore. That means everybody tried to bind him. They had kicked him out of the town so that the only place he can live is among the tombs. He is a dead person, and the only people who will accept him are other dead people. It says they couldn't even bind him with a chain. And it says that he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons of his feet. So people so wanted to keep him away and keep him unable to do anything that they tried to bind him with chains. But no one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. This man was suffering incredibly on the inside, and it was so much that he was starting to cut himself. He's a cutter in the first century, right here in this story. And Jesus, when he comes into interaction with this man actually runs to Jesus and throws himself at Jesus' feet, and the spirits that are in him start speaking to Jesus. And they say to him, "Son of God, have mercy on us. Don't destroy us." And so the story goes on a bit. Jesus says, "What's your name?" And he says, "My name is Legion, for we are many." Hundreds, maybe 1,000 spirits in this guy. And Jesus tells the spirit to go into these pigs, and they throw themselves off a cliff, and they drown in the water. Now, maybe to you, that doesn't sound like a crazy story. But in the ancient world, this is a crazy story. Because it takes what ancient people used to tell as a formulaic story about a crazy person and a hero who comes into the scene. It takes that story and throws it on its head. Because in the classic pagan story, The hero comes in and he executes the madman. He kills him. He would have thrown him off the cliff. He would have overcome him because no one else could, and he would have gotten rid of the guy so that the town could be at peace. But that's not what Jesus does. Jesus casts the spirit out, and look, we read further down the story in verse 15. When they came to Jesus, the people in town heard rumors about what was happening. They came to Jesus, and they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed, and in his right mind. So what do we come to discover here? We come to discover that Jesus, he didn't execute the madman. He restored him. This passage demonstrates one of the differences between the Bible and all other ancient texts. Here we find the victim is vindicated and restored. And interestingly enough, there's no corollary to this pattern of story anywhere in the ancient world outside of Jewish and Christian circles. This is a way that Christians were thinking differently because of the way that Jesus acted and the things that he did. And I just want to say to you today, if we're going to become a community of people who are like Jesus in our world, if we're going to become a community of people who are following Jesus and we value the things Jesus values and we say and do the things that Jesus says, then we've got to take his approach to people who are troubled. His approach to people who are troubled is that he loves them, that he believes there's value in them. His approach to people who are valued, or to people who are troubled, is that he ought to embrace them. And today, if we're to become a community that's like Jesus, if we're to be a Jesus community, well, then it means we have to take a certain attitude toward those who are troubled with mental problems. And that's the first point there on your outline. It's this, that the Jesus community requires that we do not discount those suffering with mental health issues. We don't say that they're worthless. We don't say that they don't deserve our compassion and love. We shouldn't be finding ways to distance ourselves from people who are troubled. It's easy when somebody is in your family who's got mental health problems. It's easy to find every reason that you could possibly find not to share Thanksgiving dinner with them, or to find a way so that you don't have to be around them. And I'm saying to you, if we're going to be like Jesus, that can't be our attitude. Now, some of us are in marriages with people with profound problems. And maybe like they're not trying to deal with their issues. Or maybe like they've found ways that you're actually helping them to continue in the issues, their troubles, their problems, their sicknesses that they have. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that when there are people who come into our midst who have problems, we shouldn't do everything that we can to run from them. We need to do everything we can to love them like Jesus would love them. In 1 Corinthians chapter 12, we're given this image of the church as the body of Christ. And we're told this, that if one part of the body suffers, every part suffers with it. If one part is honored, every part rejoices with it. That's the attitude that we're supposed to take. Even when people who are like family to us start to suffer things we can't fully understand. You know, when I think about this, I think, well, what are some practical steps that we can take? What are some steps ahead for us when we're trying to love others who are in some deep problems? The first is this: change your expectations. Change your expectations. Jesus, he told us what to expect. Jesus is he's so honest and clear with us. In John 16:33, he says, I've told you these things so that you may have, in me, you may have peace. He's given this teaching to his disciples. Hey, stick with me. You're going to have peace. And he says, but in this world you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world. You know, too often in the church we have created a culture and a familiar way of kind of relating with each other where we're basically saying that good Christians are always happy. That's a distortion of the truth. Good Christians can have joy in the midst of profound trouble. That's true. But you don't always feel it. And I'm saying to you today that when you get, or when you have someone in your life who has been diagnosed with a major health issue, it's going to require that you change your expectations. Your expectations about what's normal. Your expectations about what it's going to take to get them to a place of health. It's going to require some change of expectations because if the problem that a person has is due to something like chronic health problems or pain, or a dysfunctional family they grew up in, or abuse they had experienced over years, or an addiction or an eating disorder, it's going to take time to overcome that. Everyone involved needs to lower their expectations about just how soon this can be remedied. Now, it's true. Jesus came along and he healed miraculously and instantaneously the man who had been trapped by these spirits. The man who was walking around naked, the man who was cutting himself, the man who was just crying out, suffering in untold ways. We don't know how long he suffered. And it's true, Jesus did an instantaneous miracle for him. But if Jesus isn't doing an instantaneous miracle, it just may be that God is going to take a lot of time to heal the mental health challenge that you or someone you love has. And when it comes to changing expectations, the question that we need to ask ourselves is, will I love this person if they never change? Will I love this person if they never change? My guess is that in most cases, you'd say yes. You have a child who's suffering in these ways, you're always going to love that child, even if they can't get a handle on it. My guess is that if you have been with somebody who has had an addiction that has taken them captive for years and years, it's going to take them a long time to get better. And the only thing that will take you through is that you will decide to love them. So change your expectations. That's number one. Number two, let the doctors and the counselors do their job. Let the doctors and the counselors do their job. Your job is not to advise that person about their therapeutic route. Your job is not to advise that other person about whether or not they should take medication to treat their problem. That's really not your job. What's your job? Your job is to be a friend. Your job is to be a spouse. Your job is to be a parent. If your friend or child or spouse came to you and said, oh, I've got a liver disorder. It involves something with enzymes and something else, and I've got to take this pill. You'd say, oh, you need to listen to your doctor. You wouldn't even try to correct what the doctor was saying to them about their liver problem. Unless you'd be like, well, you should try this cleanse. That's what some people do. I don't do that. I don't like it. But that's what a lot of people do. But the thing is, if you got a problem like that, you're not trying to second guess. But so often when people are facing mental health challenges, when they're facing problems like depression, they can't get out of bed, and they're told that they need to take medication to tamper down their anxiety or to balance out their bipolar disorder or whatever it is. Too often, we can suddenly think that we know the answers because we've looked on Google. Too often, we can think that we know the answers because we heard a preacher tell us what he thought about it. Listen, that's not what you need to do. You need to find a way to be a friend. You need to find a way to send a text, to express concern, to find out what you can do to encourage that person or cheer them up and let them know that you still love them. Sadly, recently, I came in touch with an old friend who I hadn't talked to in about a year. And it just so happens that 6 months ago, he experienced a psychiatric crisis. And the thing is, I felt badly because 6 months had passed and I didn't know anything about it. And he simply said, I was so ashamed I didn't know who I could reach out to. I felt so sad to know that my friend was suffering like that and I didn't even know. Do you know what helped him so much? Is when I said to him, I don't know what all the answers here are, but I love you and I don't think anything less of you because of your problems. That helped him deeply. That's what you can do. Don't worry about coming up with a diagnosis. Don't worry about telling the person what kind of therapy they should seek or what kind of medication or not medication they should pursue. Express your love. Be a friend. Because you know what? A person should pursue this kind of help. Look at what Proverbs has to say. Proverbs 11:14 says, where there's no counsel, people fall, but in the multitude of counselors, there's safety. Look at just a few verses later in Proverbs 12:15. The way of fools seems right to them, but the wise listen to advice. Listen, the facts are that more women are diagnosed with mental health disorders than men, but I really don't think that's because women are somehow less stable. It's because women will speak openly to their doctor about their problems. It's because women are more likely, for whatever reason, than men in our culture to ask for help from professionals. Listen, if you're going through something like this, if this is a problem you find yourself in the middle of, ask for help. Go to the doctor. Go to a counselor. Because the thing is, when we as a friend try to take the place of a doctor or feel that our role is to protect that person, it's particularly hard for parents with a child who's dealing with an issue like this. We want to protect, we want to help, but in the end, because we don't have the expertise, we can actually make that problem worse. So be a friend. Be a loving person. Last step that I just want to mention is actually an attitude. It's this: a diagnosis is not the end. A diagnosis is not the end. That is to say, when a person receives a significant diagnosis about a major mental health problem, we shouldn't instantly lower our expectations that they're going to get better, or that they're going to figure out a way to balance this or to live with this reality. We shouldn't imagine that it will make them unable to be productive or to do anything of value. The Bible makes the point over and over to us that God uses the weak to express His power. And so we shouldn't imagine, oh, I gotta not, that person, I can't expect too much ever from them again. That's not the right way to look at this. Instead, as the people of God, as the Jesus community, what we expect is that people can grow and change. Things that seemed hopeless in another person, Jesus has the power to restore and heal. Now, it may not happen in a moment of time, like it did for this demoniac we read about, but it can happen. You know, one of the saddest things that can happen to a person who's in need is when the people of God forget that God actually has the resources to meet that need. When it comes to people in your life who are experiencing mental health challenges, don't give up on that person. I want you to look at the very last verse of this story about the man that Jesus healed. You know, Jesus healed this guy. He was teaching with him. This guy was sitting at Jesus' feet. He's dressed and he's in right mind and he's listening to Jesus teach. And rumors start to circulate in the village that this man is from, and they know the pigs are dead and all this stuff. And the man, he begs to Jesus when Jesus' disciples are getting ready to leave because the people from the village were like, this guy, he didn't kill our crazy man. He looks better, but that's scary, and all the pigs are dead. So please leave. And so Jesus and his disciples, they start to leave, and this man begs to go with Jesus and his disciples. Let me go be with you. Let me be one of you. And Jesus told him, no. You go back into your city and you tell them what the Lord has done for you. And so we read this, the very end of the story. The man went away and he began to tell in the Decapolis, that's the place he's from, how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. Like I said, I don't know how long this guy suffered. I don't know how long he lived in the tombs. I don't know how long he was cutting himself and crying out at nobody. I don't know how long he had supernatural strength to break chains that they tried to hold him back with. But God reached him. God changed him. And you know what? Jesus is still doing this same activity today. He still heals. He still restores. He still redeems. He still transforms people's lives. And today, the thing that we can walk away with is real faith in God, who's able to heal and transform even when people we love are suffering with things we don't fully understand. God still works powerfully. God still can make it right.